Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, December 6th, and we're going to talk about ethics. Before we begin, I have to tell you, we have two presenters. We have Staren, who's on the line, and we have Ralph, who just emailed me. All of a sudden, he got dropped from Zoom, which is why we started a few minutes late. So if you just give us a second, we're trying to get Ralph back on. I just wanted to turn the webinar platform on just so that you all knew that this was still happening. So give us a minute to get Ralph back in, and we'll get started. Let's see here. Technology on a Friday in December. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a moment, folks, just so I can send something over to Ralph so he can get logged back in. Believe it or not, this isn't the craziest thing that has ever happened, losing one of our presenters to a internet malfunction. But here we go. Okay, I think Ralph is gonna attempt to log back in a different way. Screens back together. I'll go through my intro while we're waiting for Ralph to log back in. Hopefully log back in. Okay. Okay. So let's go through some housekeeping while Ralph logs back in, hopefully. If you have any technical questions, type them into the chat box. I'll do my best to help you and answer those. For questions related to the presentation, again, just type them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those. What we're going to try to do is go through 4 different scenarios, and at the end of each scenario, we'll take a few minutes for questions. So if you think of a question for that specific scenario, make sure you type it right away. And then we'll try to pick up some stragglers at the end if we have time. So again, just get those questions in there. Up on your screen is a list of our APA chapters and divisions that participate in the consortium. We have just about everybody, and we're glad to have you all here. We're so thankful for our chapters and our divisions for sponsoring. If you don't see your chapter or division listed, reach out to them, reach out to me, and we'll get everyone connected. We have 2 webinars left for the rest of the year. Next week, we have law, and then on December 27th, we have a kind of a New Year special regarding staff reports. You can register for these and all of our upcoming sessions on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And we already have, I think, maybe 10 or 12 sessions already scheduled for 2025. Those will be coming up on our website shortly in the next couple weeks. So again, be sure to check back. So today's session is worth 1.5 CM credits and one of the ethics credits. I know it says to be determined on our website. I will update that with the number here shortly as soon as I finish my intro. And I will also put a link to the direct listing on the CM website. I'll put that in the chat box for y'all too. So to log those credits again, head over to planning.org, log into your MyAPA account, and you can search either by the title or the event number or the link that I put in the chat, all the things. And if you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes, when new sessions are available for you to register for, and of course, what's on tap for the week. We record all of our sessions. We post them to our YouTube channel. So head over to YouTube and just type in Planning Webcast and we'll pop up, along with our well over 500 session recordings. And those are all available to you for free. So that's the end of my housekeeping items. Again, if you have questions, type them into the Q&A box. Don't raise your hand. We don't have sound or any other available things for you there. And we will get started. Can you send the link to, okay, I can do that. Darren, do you want to kick it off? Are you able to do that? Do you have the PDF up? Are you ready to do this?
I have
While
the PDF
we try to
up.
get poor Ralph.
Yeah. So Ralph and I are text messaging back and forth, and
Okay.
so he's trying to get in right now, and I sent you the email address he wants you to send the link to, so hopefully
All
he can
right.
get in. But we can
Got
definitely
it.
get things kicked off and then switch back over to Ralph's actual PowerPoint
Right.
presentation since I only
That's
have a
fine.
PDF.
Look at how agile we are. We're doing it.
This is the world we live in.
Isn't it?
All right, let me know if you guys can see my screen. All right, so I'll just give a brief introduction for myself and stall a little bit more until Ralph jumps on the call. So my name is Theron Fauché. I am the, Ralph's on now. There we go. So Ralph, I will
praise
actually
be.
let you take over sharing your screen since you have the actual presentation and I only have the PDF. So I will stop sharing.
Ralph, don't do that to me again. Don't do it.
But while Ralph gets set up, I'll continue just with
I
my
didn't do
introduction.
anything. That's the problem. Okay, so ready for me to share the screen or okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, we're ready to roll.
Let's dive in.
Okay, sorry about the snafus. So this is the ethics case of the year, the 2024 Ethics Roundup. Um, I'm Ralph Wilmer. I am the AICP Ethics Officer. I'm a retired planner, having worked most of my career as a consulting planner and then working for a regional planning agency outside of the Boston area. Starren, I'll let you quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Theron Fauché. I'm a transportation planner for WSP out of Dallas, Texas. I am on the AICP Ethics Committee, currently the co-chair, and I'm also the Region 3 AICP Commissioner.
Okay, so for today, we're going to be doing a refresher on planning ethics. We'll do an overview of the activities from 2023, and then we'll dive into 4 different ethics scenarios. So we need to go over this disclaimer every time we start one of these sessions. The session has been created to provide general education regarding the AICP Code of Ethics. Although ethical scenarios and question and answer sessions are an important part of illustrating the application of the code's provisions, all certified planners should be aware that only the AICP Ethics Committee is authorized to give formal advice on the propriety of a planner's proposed conduct. If you have a question regarding a situation in your own professional practice, You are encouraged to seek informal advice from me as the AICP Ethics Officer. My phone number is there and my email is there. When someone contacts me, I get back to them and set up a time that I would call them for informal advice. So we have the AICP Ethics Pledge. This is something that you can find on the AICP Ethics webpage, planning.org/ethics, where you can find all things relating to ethics. And this is something that you can print out. So we encourage people to put it on their refrigerator or on their bulletin board or on the wall in their office, wherever they feel that it would be useful for them. By way of background, in 1992, APA adopted a set of ethical principles in planning that served in 3 different ways. One was to guide planners in the way they serve the public interest. The second main topic is to maintain high standards of integrity and proficiency. And the third is to improve planning competence. So this theoretically applies to all APA members, whether or not they're members of AICP as well. For AICP specifically, we have the Ethics Code that was originally adopted way back in 1948 and has been revised a series of times, most recently in January of 2022. And that is divided into 5 separate sections. One is the aspirational principles, section A, and those are essentially the things that we encourage planners to do in their everyday practice. Section B is the rules of conduct, and those are the rules that we try to encourage planners not to engage in. Section C governs the process for seeking advisory opinions, whether they are informal via a phone call with me or formal in writing issued by the Ethics Committee. Section D covers the process for filing a complaint, and Section E describes the options available to the ethics officer if a complaint is rendered to be valid. Then I have several different means by which an AICP member could be disciplined depending upon the severity of the matter. So in summary, Section A, the aspirational principles, that's further divided into 5 main topics. And we encourage people in the planning process, and this is everyone, we're talking about planners, whether they are public or private planners, planning board and commission members, members of the public, applicants before various boards. This is what we try to encourage for all planners. So first section is to continuously pursue and faithfully serve the public interest. Second is to do so with integrity. The third is to work to achieve economic, social, and racial equity, which is something that has been recently updated. 4 is to safeguard the public trust, and 5 is to improve planning knowledge and increase public understanding. And this is sort of a twofold thing. One, in our roles as planners to educate the public, but also internally within the profession to share our knowledge through conferences and webinars and things along those lines that we routinely participate in. There are 24 rules of conduct, and these are the rules by which planners can be held accountable. They've been recently revised and organized into 7 different topics. 1 is quality and integrity of practice. 2 is conflict of interest. Then improper influence or abuse of position. Honesty and fair dealing in the planning process. Section 5 is the responsibility that we have to our employers. Section 6 is a new one regarding discrimination and harassment. And Section 7 relates to process of bringing an ethics charge and cooperating with an investigation that I am charged with conducting. So in 2022, there was an update to the code. both sections A and B were reorganized. In section A, we did add a stronger emphasis on economic, social, and racial equity, and made some of the provisions regarding discrimination and harassment more explicit. We clarified some issues regarding how an ethics investigation is conducted, and then try to promote within, by AICP members, the responsibility for promoting ethics in general. The rules of conduct were also revised slightly to address cultural biases, again, to emphasize equity. And we claimed, we wanted to clarify some issues regarding claiming credit. Plagiarism is still a concern that we get a fair amount of complaints about, and we wanted to clarify those provisions. One major change that was made in 2022 regards who can file an appeal. So anyone, whether you are a planner or not, can file a complaint with me as the ethics officer. And a lot of complaints that I do receive are from members of the public. And it may not surprise you that some of them may actually be frivolous. So they do get dismissed when there's no evidence to support unethical behavior by a planner. And in the past, those individuals would be able to file an appeal. But we have now eliminated the ability for members of the public who are not AICP members from filing an appeal. And frankly, that helps to helps me in handling my caseload. We did add one new feature to the glossary in 2022. This is a new feature to the code, and we added a glossary. The glossary is related particularly to terms relating to DEI issues, how we're handling that within the code. So we wanted to summarize activities in 2023. Every year I'm charged with writing an annual report that summarizes activities from the previous year. So in 2023, I had 108 inquiries for informal advice. That works out to approximately 10 phone calls a month, and 28 new complaints were filed. As you might expect, there's always some overlap between years, and ongoing cases carry on for a while. So in 2023, there were 42 different cases that I had ongoing in one stage or another. A number of them were under various states of review in terms of the investigation process. And there were 18 cases that were dismissed, either because there was no justification to file a charge, or sometimes I get complaints that are filed against planners who are not AICP, and I have no jurisdiction over handling those complaints. I have to dismiss them. In terms of cases that were resolved, there were 3 cease and desist letters issued for misuse of the AICP credential. This is an issue that we take very seriously because everyone who is AICP has gone through the process of studying and studying for and taking the exam. They've gone through the process of becoming fully AICP after the AICP candidate process. They're paying their dues. They are maintaining their certification maintenance credits. So when we find out, however, through whatever means we find out, if I'm made aware that someone is using the AICP credential but is no longer a member, I issue cease and desist letters. And most of the time, the letter, the individual will review the letter and make amends. Sometimes they weren't aware that their membership had lapsed, and they go through the process of resubmitting for getting their membership reinstated. In terms of some other cases, I issued a preliminary determination that a violation occurred for inappropriate references to indigenous populations during a presentation at the 23 National Planning Conference. That subsequently did lead to a full complaint, which is now under appeal. I issued several confidential letters of admonition, which is generally the lowest level of discipline that I have at my disposal. One was for plagiarism, one was for inappropriate postings on social media, and another was relating to comments made at an APA-sponsored meeting. And the most significant form of discipline at my disposal is a public letter of admonition and revocation of the AICP, and in this case, an FAICP credential, and it was a matter involving sexual harassment. It says here that it was upheld on appeal by the Ethics Committee. It was a case from 2022 that carried into 23 when the appeal was heard by the. This is a breakdown of all of the phone calls and complaints that I received by category, and you can see the conflict of interest and quality and integrity of the practice tend to be the two highest numbers of calls or complaints. I would say that probably will hold true when I do the 2024 annual report next month. But you can see the breakdown. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail about this. But one thing that I will add is that we've been looking much more seriously at the issue of artificial intelligence, because I've gotten a number of phone calls about that. We have jointly worked with the technology division of APA on a blog post, which you can find on the ethics page, that addresses some of the ethical issues relating to AI. And APA also produced a report on AI that includes a chapter on ethics. We break them down by state as well. The map is pretty self-explanatory. So you can find the annual report is also posted on the ethics. I want to dive in a little bit more deep. So with that,
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
There's just two quick general questions that I wanted to get to before you jump into the scenarios. And the first one is there a resource to check whether someone is actually AICP? So not from like the APA side, but from the public side.
If someone is interested in finding out whether a member is AICP, as it relates to the ethics process, they can contact me and I will double check with staff. If you are an APA member, you can look at the membership directory, but those records are not always the most complete, and it's basically whatever the member decides to put in. So I don't rely on that resource as a way to fully tell me whether or not a member is actually AICP or not.
Okay.
And
But when a
one
complaint
long
gets
way
filed, I'm sorry?
I was going to say one long way to do it. There's actually a AICP group on LinkedIn, and you can't get in if you're not AICP or FAICP. And so you could check that, but I think you have to be a member to actually check that. But
Okay.
it is a resource.
Yeah. And when I get a complaint, which is done online through a form, I am alerted as to whether or not the person alleged to have violated the code is actually AICP, so then I can determine whether or not I have to proceed.
Okay, thank you. And then the second quick question before you move on to your first scenario, if a complaint is filed, whether it's frivolous and thrown out or not, is the planner who the complaint is about, do they get notified regardless of anything, or only if there's some kind of action required?
I don't notify them automatically. I notify them if I want some additional information, and sometimes it's just an interview. But if I feel that the charge is warranted based on the information that was submitted to me, I may issue a preliminary determination letter that a violation has occurred, which puts them on notice, but it also gives them an opportunity to respond to the allegation, and that's sort of one of the midpoints in the investigative process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the first scenario will be taken by Starren, and it relates to conflict of interest and responsibility to your employer.
All right. Thanks, Ralph. So conflict of interest is a pretty interesting one because I think when you were looking at the list of cases from 2023, I think conflict of interest was a number one category that people at least had inquiries about. So it's something that we always need to keep in mind as planners, and it's one of the few things that you'll hear planning schools talk about in terms of ethics violations, maintaining or making sure you are avoiding the appearance of a conflict of interest. So the first scenario here is marijuana and conflict of interest. And people always ooh and ah when they see marijuana on the screen. It's an interesting topic with the changes going on around the country, but that's really a red herring in this situation. So Odia AICP is a planning consultant living in the town of Suarez. She's accused of working 2 jobs without notifying her employer at the time, which is the town of Suarez. She's also charged with conflict of interest because she had a contract with a marijuana company. Next slide. So Odia explained that she was a consultant for Suarez and not an actual full-time employee. So she did not approve any kind of permits. She was just working as a zoning official. She provided guidance on keeping the zoning code consistent with the comprehensive plan and was hired by the marijuana company to site a retail store in the town. And so the 2 jobs weren't actually related. And she was also not an employee of the city of Suarez. And so it's not the same type of conflict that the person reporting said it was. There was only about a 2-month overlap between her working for those 2 clients as well. So some of the issues to think about here. So aspirational principles 4.5, avoid conflict of interest, even the appearance of a conflict of interest in accepting assignments from clients or employers. And so again, if you do something and it looks like you're doing something wrong, oftentimes someone in the public may not like what you're doing as a planner, and so they're looking for any reason at all to complain about what you're doing or get you removed from the project. And so avoiding that appearance avoids any potential issues that may come up. And sometimes just the appearance of a conflict and then someone reporting it or making it an issue can cause an issue where there's not an issue at all. So avoiding that appearance really helps everything out in this situation. Next slide. Excuse me. So ethical issues continue. So the code of conduct. So number 7 says we shall not, as public officials or employees, accept from anyone other than our public employer any compensation, commission, rebate, or other advantage that may be perceived or related to our public office or employment. So again, we can't take payment for planning outside of our job, especially if we don't have permission to do so. 18 says we shall not as employees undertake other employment in planning or a related profession, whether or not for financial remuneration, without having made full written disclosure to the employer who furnishes our pay. In no case shall a planner engage in any outside work that would create a conflict of interest. We had a planner several years ago who mainly worked on GIS, but he had a side consulting business, and we found out that he was actually making GIS maps on the side for his friends who worked for cities or other places. He was not AICP certified. And so there was a bit of a conflict there, but since he wasn't certified, no one made a complaint against it. And again, this was years ago, before I was even certified myself, but it was an issue at the company I was working at. Continue. So scenario 1, did Odia have a conflict of interest because her work for a marijuana business and consulting with the town? So was there a conflict of interest with her working in both places on both types of projects? Ralph?
So ultimately, after looking at the evidence submitted by the individual involved, by Odelia, I decided that there wasn't a conflict of interest because she was a consultant, not when the complaint first came in, the complaint made it appear that she was an employee of the town, in which case, if she wanted to also work on behalf of the marijuana business, she would have had to seek written permission from her employer that it was okay to do both. And that disclosure can go a long way. But when I investigated it further and actually got some information from Odelia directly, it was clear that she was a consultant, not an employee of the town. She had these two separate clients. All parties involved were aware of the work that was going on. So she provided proper disclosure to all, and everyone was okay with it. And therefore, I decided that she did not have a conflict of interest.
So question number 2, does the time period of overlap in the two clients matter?
No, and I think the point here is that there's nothing in the AICP code that really has a timeline associated with it. So you may be familiar, for instance, with provisions that you would find in state law or state ethics codes, for instance, that may govern a cooling off period, for lack of a better term, where between the time that a legislator, for instance, who steps down from elected office can register as a lobbyist, lobby in front of that same legislature. We don't have anything like that in our code of ethics. So I get a lot of questions, about a planner who's working for the public sector and is entertaining a position that might be offered to them to work in the private sector. There's nothing in the code that prevents you from doing that. But having said that, I usually caution people who ask to just double check with the state ethics code to see if there's something there that might govern that particular question. Because in general, I would say that if there are provisions in a state ethics code on the same topic, that would supersede anything that I would say vis-a-vis my recommendation relating to the AICP.
And this comes up sometimes when people confuse the overlapping working with different places with the overlapping of different, or say conflict of different arguments. Like if you have one position on, say, zoning in one area, and you have a different position on it for another client, you can't overlap in those situations because it's like you're advocating for two separate ideas at the same time. It's different, but sometimes people confuse that, especially I was teaching a training course for the AICP ethics or AICP exam, and that's one of the things that came up with students.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, that is actually the only provision that has some sort of a time frame associated with it. So for 3 years, you cannot take a different position on the same issue, whether it's for different client or the same employer, unless there are always caveats, and there are caveats in the code. If there's some substantial change in information that leads you to a different conclusion, that's fine. But we want to prevent the situation where planner worked for a municipality, a year later gets hired by a private company to essentially work in the same geographic area and come up with a different conclusion. So as that consultant, you should not be taking a position that is contrary to the position that you took when you were a public planner at that same concern.
All right, Ralph. So the real life scenario, actually, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it with the previous slides, but I did dismiss the charge after the evidence was presented that she wasn't a consultant, or that she was a consultant and not a direct employee of either the town or the marijuana company, and that the disclosure was provided. And to add one more detail, she was not writing any new zoning code on behalf of marijuana. There was pretty much a separation between those duties. So we're now on to scenario 2. I'll quickly check in to see if there are any questions on scenario 1, Christine.
Yeah, we have let's do 1 or 2 here. So the question is, did Odilia have an appearance of conflict? Was it an advisable situation to be in?
So, and I would say this question has come up almost every time I've presented this scenario. One could argue that, yes, there was an appearance of conflict. I would answer that 2 ways. One is that I became aware of it after the fact, so there was nothing that I could do to undo the situation. But I think more importantly, the fact that there was disclosure at all levels and that all parties essentially approved of the situation, that I felt that the appearance issue could be overcome through those disclosures.
Okay. And this is just a kind of an interesting question. I don't really know that you can have a good answer for it, but if there were a different person in your role, Ralph, is it possible that they could have come up with a different conclusion or ruling on Odilia? Right?
I would say that's certainly a possibility. So just by way of background, quick history, from the very outset, it was APA's executive director who served as the ethics officer. And that was fine as long as the executive director was a planner. Then, I don't know, maybe 10-ish years ago, APA hired an executive director who was an association director with a lot of experience, but not a planner. And that is when the outside position of ethics officer was created. And my predecessor was hired, and he did it for 7 years. And I've been doing it for about 2.5. So having said that, yeah, it's conceivable that someone else might have come up with a different response. Ethics is not an exact science. And if you think about the AICP exam questions relating to ethics, there are multiple choice, 4 choices usually. You can probably throw out 2 of the choices very quickly because they seem silly or irrelevant. But then you look at the other 2 choices that you have to answer from, and it could be a pretty fine line as to which one is the right one and which one is the wrong one. So there is a fair amount of interpretation, and I think that's just the way it is. So yes, I would say it's conceivable that my predecessor might have come up with a different answer, or my successor might.
And pardon me for calling her Odia. When I presented this in Texas, folks in the room were, I guess they were pronouncing the L as if they were speaking Spanish, since the town is Suarez. Anyway, it's Odilia.
And it's all a pseudonym anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so moving on to scenario 2, planners in difficult positions. And this is something that I'm finding to be a source of questions or complaints with an increasing frequency. I had actually 2 calls yesterday. So John is a senior planner in Bluesville. He's been tasked with conducting a review of a large development project and preparing a staff report in which he identifies a number of different issues and includes them in the staff report. The developer asks Yoko, who's the Bluesville planning director, to remove some of the recommended changes and conditions. And Yoko then asks John to make those changes, but he is reluctant to do so. His name is on the report. He didn't feel that they were appropriate or justified. And he got nervous about his name being on a report that he felt did not adequately reflect what he thought were issues that should be addressed in the permitting documentation. Given all of that, Yoko still insisted that John make the requested changes, and John then asks for his name to be removed from the report. So one question that we had to think about was, is John facing a potential violation of the code if he complies with Yoko's request to revise the report as requested by the developer? So as I mentioned, I'm seeing a fair number of these kinds of scenarios come up, and they come up in a couple of different ways. Sometimes it's political pressure. So the planner, whether it's a planner in a large firm, a large municipality, or a planner who is the sole professional planner on staff within the municipality, may be pressured by a city manager or a city council or a town council or the mayor to take a particular position. And the risk, the choice essentially being, does the planner then decide to do what he or she is told, knowing that, or at least feeling in their mind that they might be violating the code of ethics by complying with the request, or do they hold true to the code and their belief in the fact that they do not want to violate the code, and then run the risk of losing their job? And I get some calls where a supervisor has threatened to terminate someone if they don't do as told. This situation is also coming up a little bit more often in smaller communities where there's a small planning staff and maybe the director's position has been vacant for a while for whatever reason. And the junior planner is now reporting to an assistant town manager or someone at that level who's not a planner, who's not aware of the code. And they're just asking the planner to do what they think is right. So it is a concern, and I try to advise people as best I can, given the particulars of their situation. So further, how should John respond if he's given orders by the mayor, who's not AICP, to change the report, with the possibility of losing his job if he did not comply? And that's a real scenario. I try to play that out for them when I get this type of call, but it's hard for me to tell someone that they should do something that may jeopardize their job. That's not my role. But I want to give them the best advice I can, because the wild card is that we don't have any control over who might file a complaint. And as I mentioned at the beginning, part of the session, anyone can file a complaint. So there may be someone in the public who is really watching the process unfold, and it's conceivable that the planner may have a charge filed against them. Whether it's valid or not is to be determined, but no one likes to have a charge filed against them. So I try to make people aware that that is a potential outcome, regardless of how they decide to respond. And another question, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, is, how should John address his concerns if he was a junior planner without direct supervision from someone, an experienced planner? And what I tell people in these types of situations is to let their supervisor know that they are governed by a code of ethics and why they take that code seriously, and use the code as a way to protect themselves, maybe shield themselves against orders to do things that the planner feels might be in violation of the code. And one option, and I discussed this with a caller yesterday, is that the planner, maybe there's someone else who could be the face for that particular permit application or whatever, and changing the name on the report. There are ways that you can try and create a level of separation between the planner, the public, and the supervisor in a way that protects all parties involved. So when we think about some of the aspirational principles that are involved in this particular case, planners are required by the code to provide timely, adequate, clear, accessible, and accurate information to all parties, to facilitate the exchange of ideas and do so in a meaningful and timely manner, and to exercise fair, honest, and skilled, independent professional. So that's what we should be doing day in and day out in our professional lives. There are several rules of conduct that I think come into play. Number one is we shall not deliberately fail to provide adequate, timely, clear, and accurate information on planning issues. This is sort of a big umbrella type of provision that can cover all sorts of different types of complaints and confusion. We shall not direct or pressure other professionals to make analyses or reach findings that are not supported by the available evidence. And in this particular case, I felt that the planning director was looking to eliminate certain provisions in the staff report that I thought would fall under this particular provision. As public employees, we shall not engage in private communications with planning process participants. I was a little concerned about whatever communications might have occurred between the developer and the planning director. And I think that applies for number 10 as well. So, just the whole issue of private communications and unfair advantage that might create are things that we're routinely. So as I got into this, I advised John to work with his supervisor to incorporate necessary comments and conditions through the staff report that adequately address the outstanding issues. Since ADA was the one of the issues that John was concerned about being removed from the staff report, I suggested that he talk to the town attorney to express concern about potential liability to the municipality if ADA provisions or conditions were removed from the potential permit documentation. And also, I tell people to do this a lot, just document your actions. Just make sure that there's some support that shows what you've done, what the issues were, how they were addressed or not addressed, just so that you have something to fall back on if a complaint is filed. In this particular case, ultimately his name remained on the report, but some of his concerns addressed. Just as an end note to this particular matter, after several phone calls with this planner, a complaint was filed last month. So I'm now conducting a more thorough investigation into the action all parties involved in this particular matter. That's pending and has not been fully resolved. So we're going to move on to scenario 3, but again, we can check in to see if there are any questions.
Let's move forward.
Okay, take it away, Starren.
All right, you can go to the next slide. So years ago, I did my first ethics presentation. I think it was around 2014, and I was trying to fill time because the person I was presenting with didn't show up. And so I went around the room and asked every single person in there why they became a planner. And nobody talked about making money. No one talked about writing codes, doing transportation plans. They all talked about serving their community, making the place they live a better place to live. But oftentimes we find that we can't do that as planners if we're working for a city because we don't want to upset somebody because we complain about an ordinance that's put out by the city, or we're a consultant working in a town and we feel powerless sometimes because we want to work in that city. And so volunteering is one of those ways that we as planners can give back to the community and actually do what we set out to do as planners in a way that doesn't beat us down because it's work. So the first scenario here is Catherine AICP lives in the city of Bauer, where she's a planner. So she's been asked by the mayor to serve on Habitat for Humanity's Affordable Housing Committee as a city representative. Again, she's representing the city, but she's on Habitat for Humanity. So again, it's an opportunity for her to do her job, but also an opportunity to serve her community. Second here, we have Ethel AICP. She lives and works for the city of Elmer Woods and is concerned about a zoning proposal regarding setbacks and dimensional requirements being presented at a public hearing in her neighborhood. Next slide. So a couple of things to consider here with the aspirational principles. Exercise fair, honest, skilled, informed, and independent professional judgment. Again, making sure you're giving an informed opinion, but also you're not just taking things at face value. You're actually looking at it and thinking about it, leaning on your background as a planner to make decisions. Avoiding conflict of interest. Again, the appearance of conflict of interest, that's always super important to try to make sure you're avoiding that appearance. Most of the time when an accidental conflict of interest happens, it's an accident and you don't realize it happened. People may not realize it happened, but sometimes we do things that look like it and that gets more attention. Disclose, disclose, disclose. That's always important. If you think there's gonna be an issue in any way, disclose as often and as transparently as possible. Do so as broadly as possible. Finally, contribute time and effort to our communities, particularly to those groups lacking adequate planning resources through pro bono planning activities. Again, that goes back to serving our communities. And so again, don't let working as a planner get in the way of your reason for becoming a planner in the first place. Next slide. Code of conduct. So we shall not, as public officials or employees, accept from anyone other than our public employer any compensation, commission, rebate, or other advantage that may be perceived as related to public office or employment. So again, we're not taking money for doing work outside of the job that we're doing. We're not taking extra compensation to make a particular decision. Every decision that we make is based on the data, is based on public input, not what somebody forced us to say when the evidence or the data doesn't necessarily support it. Also, we shall not fail to disclose the interests of our client or employer when participating in the public process. So here are the outcomes that we want to have for the plan that we're putting together. Here's how we're going to get there. Don't just go out there and present some information without saying why we're doing it and what we're trying to get from that information. Next slide. So question number one, should Catherine accept an appointment to the Affordable Housing Committee?
So in Catherine's situation, the Habitat for Humanity Committee, Advisory Committee, or whatever, was an entity that had been around for a while, and there was always a representative of the city who had a seat on that committee. The difference here was that it was the first time that it was someone from the planning office that was being asked to fill that seat. So she wanted to just double check as to whether or not she can do that. As was mentioned at the beginning of this scenario, it was a request from the mayor, because it was the mayor who was charged with identifying someone to fill that seat. So in the end, I said that that would be.
So should Ethel comment on the zoning proposal at the public hearing in her town?
And in this case, I was a little bit more cautious because even if Ethel disclosed that she was a city representative, that she was a member of the city's planning department, I wasn't convinced that it would be worthwhile for her to publicly come out at a public hearing and oppose a zoning proposal that was being drafted by the by members of her department, essentially. In this particular case, it was not a significant change. It was regarding some minor changes to dimensional regulations. But that didn't really change my outlook on this particular question. Certainly if, for instance, the city was proposing to increase density in housing, say in the downtown area, and Ethel happened to live in the downtown area and didn't like the increased density there, but it was a policy of the town per their comprehensive plan. There's no way that there's no amount of disclosure that would compensate for the fact that Ethel should not get involved in that process. Your primary responsibility is to your employer. But we also must recognize that planners are citizens of their own communities. And there are times when, we may own property that we may want to build a house on, or we may have a house that we want to expand, and we may need a variance. We may need to go through a permitting process to get that stuff done. So the bottom line, and we've emphasized this a few times during this presentation, disclose, disclose. So if you find yourself in a situation like that, just make sure that all parties know that you're an employee of the city. You recognize that you need a permit to do this home expansion, but just leave it at that because someone's going to have to make a decision, and but you have the right to ask for that kind of permit relief. So, in terms of the real life outcomes, we've pretty much covered that. With Catherine, I would further recommend that she provide written disclosure when appropriate, that she is a planner within the municipality and she's sitting on that Habitat for Humanity committee, but that she also recuse herself when there's a conflict with any project that she might be working on for this. And with Ethel, we talked about getting disclosure and wanted to speak out about something.
Ralph, what do
within
you
your
recommend in that
community.
situation when you're the town planner and there's no one else to review those cases? I know sometimes that comes up.
Yeah, that could come up. I mean, for most of the places that where I am where I have been practicing in my own career, the decision is ultimately made by a planning commission or a planning board. So, you're not the decision maker per se, but I think that, in the instance where you're looking to do something that requires a more substantive review and you are the only planner, you may need to recommend to the community that they hire a peer review consultant to review the application and to make whatever recommendations need to be made vis-a-vis the application that you're. So before we jump into 4, wanted to see if there's any questions on number 3.
Let's see. Question 3.2. What if Ethel was with the county for a city hearing or with the city for a county hearing? So not same jurisdiction, but related.
Then I think there's a little bit more leeway in terms of whether or not it would be appropriate for her to comment on it. Clearly, if she was involved in the work, she should recuse herself and just try to not get involved as much as she might want to. But if she's working for a county, for instance, and she lives in one of the municipalities within that county, there's no overlap between the work that she's doing for the county and her concern as a city resident. I think she can say something, but she should definitely disclose that she's an employee of county, and she should get permission. There may be instances, for whatever reason, political or otherwise, where her supervisors at the county level may not want her to speak out. The last thing anyone would want to get involved with is a scenario where her supervisors are taken by surprise by a position that she takes publicly. Um, and I think the same would be true if she was a city employee working and living somewhere else in the county. I think that separation is probably a little clearer because her primary responsibility is to the city for which she's working, and apparently, she's living outside the city. There shouldn't even be a need for disclosure.
Two more questions. This one just came in, and I'll ask this one. Why would Ethel need supervisor's approval to speak on her own behalf if she makes that disclosure and also clearly differentiates it in the hearing between her speaking as an employee versus speaking as a citizen? Could this not be considered some kind of violation of free speech?
I mean, yes,
It's getting gray. It's getting gray in here.
Yes, yeah. So it's a question of free speech versus responsibility to your employer. And one of the reasons that I would caution against doing it without at least letting your employer know is just because, I would like to try and avoid a situation where even if it's somewhat more of an irrational reaction, I don't want to make a recommendation to someone and then find out that the planner got fired because they didn't take that extra step to notify that do that. So just to eliminate surprises. But yeah, the free speech argument is a valid point as well.
Okay. This is a question adjacent when we're talking about volunteering. The question says, can a private sector planner serve on a planning commission of the city where they live? And I think the answer would probably be, well, yes. But here's the tricky part here. So, and I think this is actually really important, and I will. Does it make a difference if their firm does or does not have any current contracts with that community? And does that preclude the consultant from proposing on or working on any projects for that community?
This certainly has come up a lot, and I would also say that it has come up personally. So it's not unusual for a private sector planner to be asked to serve on a commission. And I could imagine that the municipality would see that as an advantage to having a planning professional serve on a commission, provide advice, because a lot of these commissions are, the membership is the so-called citizen planner. I worked most of my career as a private sector planner, and I was routinely asked to join the redevelopment board in the town in which I live. My reason for turning it down was more time management related than anything else. But had I said yes, I would have worked out something with my employer. Do a couple of things. One would be that, if there was an obvious conflict, for instance, if I was on that commission and the planning and and my employer was hired by a private developer to review a proposal, I would recuse myself from reviewing that proposal. If my employer was interested in bidding on a project, I would recuse myself from participating in the review of that proposal. But I may also, depending upon the nature of the project, I may also recommend to my employer that it would be much of a conflict, and I would not want to be involved in bidding on that project. But if the firms are large enough, there are ways to create the separation necessary so that the commission member, who's also the planner in the firm, is not involved in any way, shape, or form in that project, and that other people working on the project may would be involved, and it wouldn't affect me as a member of the commission. But if there was any review or anything related to it, then I would have to recuse myself. Like I said, there are probably some instances where I would have just recommended to my employer that project.
And I have a few colleagues in that situation, and that's what we always talk about. Just recuse yourself. And one of my coworkers currently is the mayor of one of the cities, and we currently don't have any projects there because that's too big of a conflict with him being the
Yeah.
mayor.
Yes. That would be as big a conflict as you could probably come up with.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on to the last one, involving issues of gentrification versus NIMBY. Probably seen this come up once or twice in our practice. So Fanny is an AICP planner working for the city of Williams, and she receives an application for a large mixed-use development, which would include 254 rental units with 10% of them set aside as affordable units for people at 80% of AMI or less. 30,000 square feet of commercial space would be developed, and 10% of that would be leased at below market rates. And the project would also include a public park and other related infrastructure improvements. 15 public meetings were held by neighborhood groups, the city council or the county council over a 2-year period of time to talk about this project. And Fanny faces strong political pressure from both sides, both opponents and supporters, to recommend their position regarding the particular project proposal. So a number of challenges are to be identified in this particular scenario. One is that the proposed project was deemed to be consistent with a recently adopted comprehensive plan. There were real concerns about gentrification in a tight housing market, and NIMBY was also an issue. And how do you balance the issues in the public interest, the need for affordable housing, the need or requirement to be consistent with local plans, and what is an appropriate scale of development for that particular site? Equity and public trust come into play as well. Perceptions of racism, perceptions of impacts on adjacent Black neighborhoods, the differing viewpoints between residential and business-related interests, and some potential conflicts between city and county interests. So what should Fanny do as an AICP certified planner when pressured to recommend approval or denial of the project? I think Fanny's responsibility here as an AICP planner is to provide that timely, accurate information to all parties, make sure that all parties have a chance to voice their opinions and to participate in a meaningful public process. And that follows through with some of these aspirational principles: be conscious of the rights of others, develop communication skills that are effective, respectful, and compassionate. As I mentioned, providing timely, adequate, clear, accurate information on planning issues to all affected persons, other parties involved in the process, provide equitable access to resources and opportunities, and recognize our unique responsibility to eliminate historic patterns of inequity tied to planning decisions, some of which may go back to decades, and to deal fairly with all participants in the planning process. So some of these are covered in the code as well, providing the clear, timely, accurate information. Another overarching provision of the code is number 6, and that's do not deliberately commit any wrongful act that would reflect badly on the planning profession. In this particular matter, we also have the 2 provisions relating to private communications, either with public planning process participants or with the actual decision makers. Do not disclose information that you might gain in a professional relationship, and do not misrepresent the qualifications, views, or findings of other professionals. So the real life outcome was that the staff report did fully analyze the impacts impartially without choosing sides. It is important that when you do issue a staff report that it be as neutral as possible in terms of laying out the information. And made recommendations on technical aspects as opposed to emotional pleas. The city council ultimately approved the project by a 4-3 vote, and the final project actually provides more affordable housing than originally planned, and promotes development in the area and increased amenities above and beyond what was originally suggested. And as one of our closing thoughts, Carol Barrett, who's a member of the Ethics Committee and a longtime writer of ethics books. In fact, even though her book is 30 years old on ethics, it's still one of the primary resources that we cite for people who are studying for the AICP exam on the topic of ethics. And she wants to make these points as it relates to this case and ethics in general. Make it simple for boards and councils to act with a clear set of reasons. Provide a narrative that supports a recommendation and decision. Include technical, substantive, and other relevant issues in those documents. And always remember that trade-offs are inevitable. So, if there are any questions at this point, we're pretty much done. This is just a final slide that lists the members of the Ethics Committee, and again, reminds you of my contact information if you have any questions regarding the code or want to get informal advice regarding ethical issues. So at this point, we can turn it over to Christine to see if there are any questions on scenario 4 or in general.
Let's start general. And there was a question somewhat related to this. So the Ethics Committee, what is their role as opposed to your role?
Okay. So as ethics officer, I guess I have a few main roles. One is that I handle all informal requests for advice, and I investigate and adjudicate any complaints that are filed with me. 2 smaller side responsibilities is that every year I do the annual report that I talked about, the intro to the session, and I'm ultimately responsible for producing this presentation every year. I staff the Ethics Committee. We meet every 2 months. The Ethics Committee is the only entity that can issue a formal written advisory opinion. It doesn't happen that often, but maybe a planner really wants to have a written support for his or her position on a particular question that has come up that may raise ethical concerns, and would like to use that written advisory opinion to support any position that he or she may take down the road. The Ethics Committee is also the committee that is charged with hearing any appeal. So anytime any decision that I make is appealed by either party, it's taken out of my hands, and the Ethics Committee can either uphold my decision in general, but rewrite different conditions or forms of discipline, or they could toss out my decision entirely and write their own decision. And lastly, I would say that, these are all experts in their fields. They are all highly valued members of AICP. And I rely on them to give me some advice when I have some sticky questions that I'd like to run by them. And I frequently consult with them during my meetings to just get another opinion on a particular issue that I think a little bit more complex. I don't know if you want to add something, Starren, as a
No,
multi-year member of the committee.
I think you pretty much said it all. I think
Okay.
one of the most important things is just you having that sounding board, different ideas, different opinions.
Yeah, the committee has helped shape some written decisions that I've made on complaints based on the questions that I'd asked.
You brought up at the beginning of the presentation collaborating with the technology division about the topic of AI, and that immediately spurred several questions about that.
Okay.
Could you just kind of give a brief overview of where that's going and what particular topics around AI? Like, are we talking about like the chat GTP kind of thing, or like what kind of narrow us down into the scope of things that you're going to be looking at?
Well, I think that the main issue that spurred it on, and probably the one more prominent topic relating to AI, has been the issue of plagiarism, taking credit, and how any AI generated document is identified when it is used. So the blog post and that report on AI that I forget who wrote it. It might have come out of the Planning Advisory Service. But the concern was that if planners are starting to rely on AI to generate reports and so on and so forth, we want to make sure that that is listed as a source and that there's no attempt by the planners to make the public assume that they wrote the report. And if there's material taken from AI that comes from other sources, we want to make sure that those sources are adequately identified in the document, the final document. Well, there was a session at the National Planning Conference in Minneapolis earlier this year that focused on ethics and AI. And the other issue that was prominent in that presentation, and it is discussed to some extent in the blog post and other documents that you can find on the topic, is that the output from AI is partially related to the input that is created to generate whatever the final product is. So we have to be careful as planners to make sure that if we're asking AI to, an AI program to generate some information outcomes, we have to make sure that we are fair, accurate, and complete in terms of the input that's provided that's going to generate that. I think those are the two major things. And as I mentioned, that session at Minneapolis tended to focus on that latter issue.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned also at the beginning when you were kind of laying the groundwork about the public letters regarding cases. Where are those?
So when it is a public letter, ultimately it would be included in a blog post. The I, as ethics officer and frequently in consultation with the ethics committee, we have the option to, if we're going to post a public letter of admonition, we have the option to either redact or include the name of the individual. And I think over the years, my predecessor and I have probably done both. But the public, the reason for doing a public letter is it's a somewhat more serious matter, and we want to use it as an educational tool. So if a public letter is out there that describes the scenario and violations involved, we wanted to use that public letter as a way to educate our members about things are potentially the egregious violations of the.
And I'll add to that, adding the name of the person actually publishing it. A lot of times that's to make sure it stops so it doesn't continue happening. If we see something that's been a habitual problem for a long time, or a situation where, for instance, someone's using the credential and they shouldn't be publishing that person's name, puts a stop to it because now it's out there that that person is committing that violation.
Thank you. I think we have time for one specific scenario question, and we're going to jump all the way back to scenario one. And the question is, when it comes to the appearance of conflict of interest, I'm still not clear about the distinction between serving as a consultant for a locality or serving as a full-time employee for that locality, whether or not there was material evidence of impropriety. That appearance of conflict of interest reality remains. So based on the information provided, I would not have come to the same conclusion. What are your thoughts on that? About like differentiating between consultant, full-time employee?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, and I understand that that there may be that difference of opinion regarding the appearance versus an actual direct conflict. And I did struggle with that to some extent, and as I mentioned, I came to the conclusion that because of the disclosure that was out there publicly, that I felt that even though one could argue that there was an appearance, that ultimately I thought that it was okay. And I did not follow through with a charge because I felt that the planner did everything that was needed to, that he needed to do to, to provide that disclosure. So in other words, I didn't think that there was reason to bring a charge of an ethics code. I felt that nothing was done that was wrong. The procedures were followed, and while one may argue whether or not there was an appearance of a conflict that should have been avoided, the planner took the actions that the code would have required the planner to do. In other words, demonstrate that there was an opinion that there was no conflict and that all the disclosures were there in writing and they were provided to me as evidence in the case. And that's sort of where I drew the line, that I didn't feel that it was a violation because the procedures to identify the potential conflict, whether it was an appearance or a real conflict, procedures were followed, and that the planner didn't do anything inherently wrong in terms of.
Thank you. Last question. Hey, if in this past year we happen to have seen another presentation that you did, Ralph, and perhaps it was slightly different, but also slightly the same, can we still log it for credit?
Yeah, I mean, if I wanted to, I'd have several dozen ethics credits, but I don't need that many. Yeah, there are people that do a case of the year every year, or they might see it um, at the national conference and then see something similar at the uh, at a chapter conference, for instance. So the bottom line is that um, you can get credit for sitting in on the session. You only get the one
Ethics
special credit for the
Yeah.
mandatory credit, and that would not carry over to the following year anyway. But no, I don't think there's anything wrong with attending. I mean, the same would be true for law or
Any session, I guess.
any session, but
Yeah.
I understand this one might have a lot more content overlap than a law or sustainability or an equity session.
Okay, thank you. We have to wrap up. It's time to go. Thank you
Okay.
both for joining me today. I appreciate it, and the ethics committee and all the members of the ethics committee, and all the work that you do to keep our planners on page. We appreciate you. Folks,
Okay.
don't forget to register for upcoming sessions like that law session next week. It's a good one. ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. Don't forget to log those CM credits. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk
Okay.
next
Thank you
time.
all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.